Hey, good morning and welcome to today's meeting, which is meeting the global demand for food assistance. As well as the group that's in the room, we have people who are following the streaming version. There is a Twitter hashtag for this called ODIDev #food assistance. Okay, I'm Steve Wiggins and I'm chairing this. And let me begin by just making, for a couple of minutes, a few comments about the landscape that we confront at the moment. We live in challenging times. In 2017, we're being told that for the first time in a few years, the numbers of people who are food insecure globally has jumped up to 108 million people, and particular concern about the food crises in 4 countries, Somalia, Yemen, South Sudan and Nigeria, with over 20 million people in danger of slipping into food emergency and famine. All on account of a combination of conflict, bad weather and other shocks, yes? And that tends to be the headline. I'd also say, however, that if you take the bigger perspective, we also live in promising times. These are not times of hopelessness, no matter what some observers like to tell us. We're making progress, if not satisfactory progress, on reducing hunger and food insecurity. And just for the older ones in the room, a walk down memory lane. 1958, 1961 is when we think we had our worst famine of the 20th century. And which country was that in, with 30 million deaths on some estimates? It was China. Unthinkable today. In the 1960s and early 1970s, the poster child for famine and hunger was a South Asian child, not an African child, a South Asian child. And yet we believe, and every time I say this, I get a warm glow, because when I first said it in the mid-1980s, I thought I was bound to be wrong. 1974 is the last great famine in South Asia, in Bangladesh, yes, in newly independent Bangladesh. It's fantastic in the year 2017 to say that is almost certainly the last great famine in South Asia, and we will never ever see that again. Subsequently, the locus of interest in famines and food crises and food emergencies has come to be Africa. But even inside of Africa, the area which is vulnerable shrinks, the magnitude of events gets smaller. Ethiopia 1973, Ethiopia 1984-85, famines of a dimension where you can genuinely use that adjective biblical, yes? Are we ever going to see that again in Ethiopia? Almost certainly not. We are not going to go back to those days. So we're seeing progress, and we're seeing progress not only on dealing with food emergencies, we're also seeing general progress on nutrition. Those of you who follow the demographic and health surveys, each new one coming out, plotting it on a graph, you will notice that for the last 10 years, the median rate of stunting across Africa has come down by at least 10 percentage points, with Ghana as the poster child of success, coming down from rates of stunting of children under the age of 5 from about 35% in 1988 to, on the most recent DHS from 2014, to round about 19%. So what we know by way of perspective is it is known how to get the policies, the programs right to avert food crises, to make progress on food security and nutrition. Clearly, much more needs to be done to scale up the successes and, where possible, to come up with new innovative ways of dealing with what remains of the problem of hunger. And I will use that as the setting to introduce the valuable work of the World Food Programme, because they are pioneers in helping us come to better policies, better programs to deal with the issues that remain on the issues of food security and hunger. So, who have we got for today's meeting? Dr. Stephen Weria-Mamo from the World Food Programme. Stephen Mamo is a very distinguished agricultural economist, been at IFPRI, been at AGRA, been at WFP more than once, been at IFAD. These days they don't allow him to do detailed research, such as the privilege we have at ODI, because he has much more important directorship responsibilities. Currently, Deputy Director, Policy and Programme Coordinator of the Food Systems Strategy. Now, responding to Weri's presentation, which is introducing the latest World Food Programme, well, the first in the series of World Food Programme reports, I have two people in the room. I have Trihadi Saptuadi, who I'll introduce in more detail when we come to the time to respond, from World Vision. Christina Bennett here, who heads up the humanitarian policy group here in program here in ODI. And on the line from Nairobi, and I hope she's picking up everything, Halima Ali Adan, who is from the Save Somali Women and Children project. You're there. Good morning. Hope it's nice in Nairobi. Okay, so Weri, would you like to introduce the report from the World Food Programme?
Thank you. So guys, I do it from here, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everybody, and really thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Thanks to ODI for this opportunity to share this new report. And indeed, thanks to Trihadi, Christina, and Halima for also joining this event. This is a report about food assistance. It's a report about WFP's core business. But really, it's not a report about WFP. This is something that I do want to say up front, because we do, even though we are implicated by the report, even though we take the report's messages on board, this is a report that we really see as being relevant to the national authorities in whose hands the bulk of food assistance, as we define it here, is in. So again, just to say that up front, it is a point that we are finding we do need to say. So how do I work this? There is a presentation. How does click which one? The green one? Is that? Okay. Let's see it. Okay.
You can see that.
There it is. Okay. So, first on what we try to do and how we do it. The first thing we've done in the report is actually to define food assistance. This is a concept that has evolved over time, and we found it's important to say what it is that we are taking as food assistance. The main point is that it's much more than food aid. Food assistance is that combination of instruments, programs and activities, and platforms that empower the poor, hungry, vulnerable people to access nutritious food. And so in addition to in-kind food transfers that most people associate with food assistance, it's actually this set of additional instruments such as food, such as cash and vouchers, but also interventions within which these instruments are applied, and then the set of platforms and additional activities that allow these programs to be put in place. So this is the definition of food assistance that we take. And then using that definition, the report addresses three questions. First, what has been happening in terms of the levels, trends, and patterns of food assistance defined in this way? So we use data from WFP to try and get a handle on what's been happening over the last several years. As that has been happening, what are the main challenges that food assistance faces? And third, what are some of the innovations, some of the solutions to these challenges that agencies are putting in place? So those are the three questions. And there are three themes that cut across the report as we address those questions. First, and this one you will be familiar with, food assistance as one of the main activities at the intersection of humanitarian action and longer-term hunger reduction. So that's one theme that runs through. The second one is that food assistance is delivered within food systems. Right? It's something which is a response to flaws, disruptions, breakages in food systems. And therefore, it's very important to understand what it is that food assistance is doing within these food systems. And third, and this is a very important one, that especially from WFP's point of view, food assistance is certainly a public endeavor, but it's built on many, many layers of commercial activity, transport, storage, finance. Very important for us to understand that. So those are the three themes that cut across the report. A very important element to this is that we tried to imagine food assistance as a sector with a demand side, a supply side, and then manifestations of the interaction of that demand and supply in terms of the scale, the coverage, and the composition of quality, composition of food assistance, indeed, and also the quality of it. So the report is built around a set of some analysis of the demand side, the supply side, and then what happens when these interact in different contexts. So I want to just give a few highlights of that analysis, beginning with the demand side very briefly, addressing some of the supply side results, and then some of what we're saying, bringing the supply and demand together. So some of those key findings. On the demand side, we considered that the demand for food assistance is based on or is driven by a number of things. First, the income of the country, of course, but the level of instability or disruption, the performance of the food system. So when we took looking at data on each of these phenomena, we found that countries clustered into four broad groups. Stable high performers, so countries are relatively stable compared to others and have relatively high performing food systems. Stable low performers, unstable high performers, and unstable low performers. And when you look at where the demand for food assistance is concentrated, you find, not surprisingly, that of course is concentrated in among those unstable countries, but covering both high and low performing food systems. But where the majority, of course, is in that unstable, low performing category. So for WFP, when you look at our portfolio, it's concentrated among those unstable, low performers, but very many countries in this unstable, high performing segment, one or two in the stable component. So stability, instability, if you like, of course, matters importantly, but it also turns out that when you look at the distribution of countries across income, most of those unstable low performers are low income countries, but it turns out that there are very many middle income countries because they are facing challenges on the stability side, but also in terms of performance. So the report goes into quite some detail about this demand side, and it turns out that the composition of food assistance in these different contexts also is different. On the supply side, sadly, I'm not sure if you can see this clearly, but the messages are what are in yellow there. First, when you look at total expenditures, now looking only at WFP expenditures, between 2009 and 2016, everything doubled, more than doubled. So expenditures on every single category, more than doubled. But it turns out that this doubling, there's a lot going on underneath it. First, middle-income countries, as I was beginning to signal, grew importantly in terms of the share. So when you look at that chart there, the blue is low-income countries, the red is lower middle-income countries, and the gray, I think that is upper middle-income countries. So when you compare 2009 to 2016, you can see that the share of middle-income countries grew quite a bit. In the top right, this is a story which many of you will appreciate. cash-based transfers, at least for WFP, grew from being almost nothing as a share of our portfolio to almost 20%. And this reflects other similar trends elsewhere. And what this does, of course, is it expands the range of constraints that one is able to address, because I'm going to show a chart in a second, because it allows you to mix, respond in a context-specific way to given vulnerability challenges. But very importantly, the last chart there is that when you look at the distribution of food assistance across contexts, so what this is, the blue is emergency context, red are recovery, if you like, and transition context. Development contexts are the gray, and then there are some others there. Comparing 2009 to 2016, it's essentially the same. So food assistance is serving similar functions today as it did many years ago, but the way it is being put in place and being implemented is different. When you look across the globe and think of that surge in expenditures, you can see that it actually was concentrated in a couple of areas. First, of course, in the Middle East and North Africa, area where we know there's major challenges at the moment. So that these are percentage changes, and then so you can see there's a huge increase there, and most areas showed significant increase except for, it turns out, Asia and the Pacific region, where I think for the reasons that Steve was suggesting, the capacity to cope is in those areas is much bigger. Okay, so important differences across regions. And then finally, on the supply side, this is a result which I signaled earlier. And this chart shows the shares on the horizontal axis, the share of WFP's portfolio devoted to cash and vouchers. On the horizontal, the share devoted to food. On the left-hand side is 2009. On the right-hand side is 2016. So you can see that in 2009, there was very few countries that had any cash-based transfers in their portfolios. But by 2016, almost every country operation had. And it really does speak to an important result which comes out of other work, and that is that the most effective portfolios are those that are blended in different ways, blended in space, blended over time. That by combining different intervention modes, you're able to address different problems. So now these blended portfolios are the norm. So that's the first question. The second question on what are the challenges. We found that it's useful to break these down into different components. First, challenges arising from what's going on globally in terms of key trends and disruptions. And those we broke down into climate change, conflict, urbanization, inequality. Those are the main ones that food assistance seems to be addressing. Some originate in humanitarian action as an area of work. So funding challenges, which I think many of you will appreciate. Then also, and this is really important, challenges linked to access, protection, and overall security. And then, if you recall, one of the themes is that food assistance is delivered within food systems. There are three systemic challenges that the report highlights. One we call the bad year or lean season problem, the last mile problem, and the good year problem. The report goes into some detail on that. But just to, I think that the names signal the issue, that sometimes you find yourself in a bad year. This is, many times, food assistance is responding very much to this. Other times, many of the hungry poor, we know, are isolated physically, institutionally, politically, economically. They find themselves more likely to be hit by the implications of a bad year or a lean season. And finally, paradoxically, the good year. If you don't handle the good year well, actually, it really damages your potential to have lasting impact. So these are the challenges that food assistance finds itself addressing. And the report goes into some of the innovations, some of the solutions to these challenges, and we can talk about those. And then if that challenge linked to access and instability and insecurity, based on an analysis of differences in costs facing WFP operations across those contexts that I mentioned earlier, unstable, relatively stable or unstable, and then relatively high-performing or low-performing, we're able to try to model some of the implications of that for the delivery of food assistance. It turns out that access challenges impose burdens on WFP alone of almost $1 billion over the world, across the world. Instability challenges imply, and these cover many countries, as you would imagine, over $2 billion a year. And then performance issues in food systems, over about $440 million. So a total burden on food assistance as delivered by WFP alone, and you can imagine we are an important actor, but there are many other actors. So the burden facing WFP is almost $3.5 billion. Another way of saying that is if these issues could be addressed, there is a dividend that could accrue to the world of $3.5 billion. The implications and recommendations, we suggest that they fall into three broad areas: urgent, important, and strategic. On the urgent side, you may have heard our executive director and others really stressing the importance of stabilizing and unleashing or freeing up humanitarian funding at the international level. This is important. I mean, this is urgent. It needs to happen right away. There's also a lot of discussion, a lot of high profile being given to these political drivers of vulnerability and food insecurity. We have taken a stab at putting an economic value on that. We know the humanitarian, the pure human cost, but the report suggests that there is also an important economic or financial return to addressing these political drivers. Second, and the report actually suggests that this second set of recommendations is really vital. As I said up front, most food assistance, as defined here, is in the hands of national authorities. You think of India's activities, you think of Brazil's, you think of Kenya's, you think of many countries. They're investing their own money very importantly. But it's very important that those activities be the best possible. The report goes into the nature of higher quality food assistance programming, emphasizing the need for enhanced capacity at the national level. This is and for sharing experiences across countries that are dealing with similar issues. So we have, for instance, WFP. We undertake a lot of supporting sharing of lessons between Brazil, for instance, and African countries. There's a lot to be learned from countries facing similar issues. The third, looking further ahead, first, data. This report is based on WFP data on food assistance. But as I said, most of the data really lie in the hands of national authorities. But we have no sight of those data. We don't know, for instance, really what the composition of, say, Kenya's food assistance portfolio looks like. It would be very important to have that information. First, so that the Kenyan authorities know what they have, as defined here, but more importantly, understand how their portfolios line up against others, line up against benchmarks that one would need to address or to identify. And second, and this may have relevance particular for this group, there are a set of really important, very practical research issues at the level of programming, what works best in different contexts, why, and second, at the level of the system. And in this case, how can one undertake food assistance in ways that promote or improve the performance of food systems? We think there's a really important opportunity there because of how important food assistance is in certain contexts. So that's the report, and look forward to discussing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Larry. Okay, our first commentator on what we've heard here is Trihadi Saptwadi, who is currently the Global Partnership Leader for Ministry Impact and Engagement at World Vision. And Trihadi's been with World Vision for several decades by now. And he's been country director in Indonesia, Laos, Nepal, regional leaders for South Asia and Pacific, and now in the global position. He's just moved to London. Trihadi, what do you make of where he has set out as the WFP position? Tell us what it looks like from the point of view of World Vision and your work.
Thank you. There's a special place for you, Stephen. So I'm here. Thank you so much. Let me say first of all, thanks to ODI for hosting this very important conversation. My response would be cover at least 3 or 4 parts. It's about the affirmation, about some question, and possibly the future opportunity to collaborate with WFP. And then the last one would be around challenges and maybe opportunities as well that we learn as a partners of WFPs and seeing our works together on the ground. So that would be my response. First affirmation that I would like to say is really, thank you so much. We applaud and affirm the strong articulation of commitment of WFP in terms of helping and supporting government to meet their national commitment to zero hunger, to meet the SDG 2. That's really critical. By the end of the day, is that the government have a responsibility to deliver to their people this program. So I would like to affirm this piece, really critical piece. The second piece is continue WFP commitment to expand and to extend their work to ensure there is a bridging between humanitarian action and sustainable long-term development impact. That's a continue, in the report is very strong that WFP continue commitment to look into that. As a part, you mentioned about the whole food ecosystem there and food system, that's really critical for us. So I'd like to affirm this. Meaning is that we're creating multi-opportunities for programmings, approaches, addressing different contexts that you mentioned about different countries there. I would like to, World Vision would like to affirm strongly in this report. We also would like to affirm the challenge and growing concern around the last mile solution. That also I would like to affirm part of the challenges that we need to bring up on this issue is about how to make sure at the same time addressing the current urgent immediate need of the most vulnerable children, but at the same time creating a space for resilience and families and communities. That's really challenges for both of us, for both from the development perspective and humanitarian action perspective. The one question from all this that I would like to ask to WFP would be looking into the new approach, new ways of doing things. Need to clarity around what actually things that WFP stops or de-invest. Is there any areas that WFP will say, we're not doing this anymore? That would be interesting to see those. The next piece that we would like to affirm is that we affirm the impressive growth of the cash programming. We believe cash programming provides agility, cost effectiveness, and much more choices to the community and families and children. But we also understand, and we still need to learn, and WFP can explain this, while we understand this cash programming is kind of game changer for many operational in the future, we would like to hear what are the challenges that emerging from this cash programming. What are risks that are associated with the growing, impressive, significant growth of the cash programming? That would be a very important conversation that we need to hear as well. That's the we would like to hear. The other piece that we also would like to applaud is that thank you, Stephen. You're mapping out about those 4 country contexts on stability versus high performance. I think that will provide new opportunities for WFP and their partners, especially NGO like World Vision, how we can build an engagement strategy with different government in those different contexts. What would be their opportunity there that we can work together to addressing those different contexts, different countries? Because we believe even in the stable and high performers, there are also still a lot of pockets of poverty and most vulnerable children that need help. And when we committed to the zero hunger, meaning no child left behind, we need to make sure that 4 boxes are addressing well for the long-term sustainability. We should not being complacent because they are stable, they high performer, they continue being stable and high performer. I don't think that would be the case. So that's on the last point that I would like to bring is the stories. I was in Rwanda 2 months ago, meeting with WFP, Royal TSM on the African Improved Food Program. AIF programs. I really appreciate the way of the public-private partnership and market-based solution being integrated into this African improved food. As the DSM and WFP and government of Rwanda putting their money, investment, providing super cereal food, put subsidy to the most vulnerable children, but at the same time also provided at the market level, market price level for the long-term sustainable development. But we have 2 challenges, and you mentioned the challenges, but I would like to tell the story in this room, what we call it 2 last mile challenges. Not only 1 last mile challenges, but 2 last mile challenges. The first last mile challenges is actually how to make sure that the food, nutritious food, goes to the targeted, the most vulnerable children in the community and in the family. Because we found, actually we applaud Rwanda ambitious target to reduce stunting in Rwanda. But we found the biggest last mile solution problem is that how to reaching out the most vulnerable children, targeted the specific individual child in the family and community, especially when the child have siblings, because the food will be distributed among all the siblings. So that's the first last mile solution. Meaning is that even though we have a really good programming and policy and strategies, by the end of the day, targeting the most vulnerable children will depend on the individual behavior of the families, mothers, fathers, and communities. How we make sure that happen. That's the first last mile problem and challenge. The second last mile problem is that on the side of the supply. The program actually brings significant impact to the increased livelihood income of the farmers in Rwanda, especially the landowner farmers. But the challenge would be how to bring that impact to the small owner farmers or landless farmers. How they can be part of the supply chain and get benefited from this end-to-end value chain of this African Improved Food Program. So I think that's the piece, because I believe the second last mile will determine the sustainable solution for the first last mile solution as well, because they're actually one family, one community with a small landowner or landless owner. So this would be very interesting working on the last mile solution. I really appreciate you bring that into the challenge that you put it there. And I'm very strong that we need to work together on those two last mile solutions, ensuring that targeting the most vulnerable children, and the second one is targeting the landless or smallholder lands farmers. Thank you so much, Stephen. I hope this creates more conversation in this room.
Thank you, Trihadik. Now I'd like to turn to Christina Bennett, who heads up the Humanitarian Policy Group here at ODI. Christina has been working for a long time on food security issues, previously Chief of Policy Analysis and Innovation at the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA. Christina, the wider background to this, the current crises in 4 countries, the alarming rise in food insecurity seen this year, being reported this year, what's your take on the context of this? Are we learning lessons, or are we not learning lessons? How do you see this?
Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks for also inviting me to speak on this panel, to be part of, to bring the humanitarian perspective to this discussion, because, you know, as you say, these 4 famines that we're seeing in East Africa have been called, you know, the worst humanitarian crises since 1945. And I guess I just want to begin by talking about that, you know, by sort of creating this hyperbolic sense around these crises, I think, first of all, calling this the worst humanitarian crisis since 1945 isn't helpful necessarily, because it's not true. I mean, I think you were speaking about the famine in China in the 60s, and that, you know, was far more significant than a lot of crises we've had since 1945. But also it obscures the real causes of the crises themselves, and the fact that these actually, you know, these are the result of cyclical weather patterns, and poor harvests, but a lot of what we're seeing here is man-made and preventable. And I think, you know, focusing on the kind of the hyperbolic nature of famine, like spreading like wildfire, actually detracts from what we can do about it, and the fact that these are caused largely by conflict and insecurity. And I don't think it comes as any surprise to any of you in the room, any of you online, or, you know, the panel, that what all 4 of these crises have in common is conflict. You've got, you know, the ongoing war with Al-Shabaab in Somalia. You've got an 8-year war with Boko Haram in northeastern Nigeria. You've got, you know, constant airstrikes in Yemen, as well as a ground war and a war just off coast. And in South Sudan, you've got a civil war that's been raging there since 2013. So what does this mean for these countries and their food security situation? Well, you know, in addition to the weather patterns and the harvests, you've got a breakdown. You've got a breakdown of governance. You've got a breakdown of economics, and you've got all of the insecurity that goes with conflicts around that. You've also got, you know, markets that not only break down as markets, but also prevented constantly from restarting. We just did a report at HPG on markets in crisis. And, you know, part of what happens is the failure, you know, the failure of the market itself, that there isn't enough food in the market, but also the breakdown of credit. And that's actually what keeps markets from resurfacing during protracted conflict situations. And as, you know, colleagues were saying, there's a huge access problem when you've got whole areas of countries that are under siege, that are being controlled by armed groups. You don't get to the most vulnerable people, and those access problems are costing money. As you pointed out, I think it's something like $2 billion costing WFP in all of those countries where there is conflict. That a lack of access is costing you extra money. It also means that governments are spending their money on services, their money that they should be spending on services. An international community is spending their aid money not on getting food to people, but actually on mitigating the conflict that's happening. It also means that, in places like Syria and Iraq, we're spending valuable aid dollars on those conflicts. 80% of money is going to resolving conflicts, and not on disaster risk reduction, on resilience building, on development holds, on all of those things that we know work to secure food in these countries. So, and that's all reflected in the appeals. If you look at the appeals for these 4 famines, they've all been very, a fraction of the money that's gone into these countries is actually has been delivered, in comparison to what's needed. And so, all of these factors come together to say that we've learned our lessons in some ways. We've gotten better at disaster risk reduction. We've gotten better at resilience. We're actually better at cash assistance and getting that money in the hands of people who need to be able to buy food and to purchase things for their family a lot quicker. But what we haven't done is addressed this issue of conflict and insecurity. We haven't been bold enough to really resolve the political issues around these protracted crises that push countries on the brink of things like famine in the first place. Investment in DRR, investment in resilience is nothing when you've got, bombing campaigns on your ports that are basically destroying your ability to get food into the country at all. So before we talk about resilience, before we start investing money in disaster risk reduction, why don't we stop those airstrikes? Why don't we prevent from conflict and insecurity from, reducing the effects of those gains in the first place and actually wasting that investment in those development programs? So what do we do about it? It's easy for me to sit here and say we put pressure on governments to, uphold their commitments to IHL, to end conflict, to not target civilians when they are waging conflict, and to open up supply routes for assistance to get through. We need to keep hammering that home. I know we all know this, but we need to keep saying it. We need to shift also our preference for response funding and really operate much more on a preventative basis. I think, we are in this constant cycle of appealing for more and more money for larger and larger responses that, as we've seen, are getting more and more costly. If we were to shift the culture in our organizations and the way that we work, to be able to invest money ahead of time, to be able to raise that money ahead of time, to be able to say that averting a conflict, averting a crisis is as or more valuable than responding to one, then actually we might be getting somewhere and trying to prevent some of the causes of the insecurity and the food shortages there in the first place. I'd love to be able to get to a day where a headline says crisis averted in East Africa versus, we're doing all that we can to respond to this horrible crisis in East Africa. I think it's a cultural shift. I'm not sure we're very close to getting there, but I think if we keep hammering those messages home, we may. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Christina. That's a very powerful way of putting it. Now I'd like to turn to Halima Ali Adan, who's on the line there, I think from Nairobi. Halima is the project coordinator for Save Somali Women and Children. Halima has strong interests in gender-based violence. Halima, I hope you're picking up what's being said here. And I'd like to get your take on this when you're working as a practitioner in East Africa and facing the realities of working in Somalia, which is one of the more conflictive areas that we're talking about this morning. Halima, what's your take?
Thank you very much, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank ODI for giving us this opportunity to contribute to this standing agenda. First and foremost, I think I would like to open the floor with saying that the best way of preventing famine is not simply having technical, composition of delivery mechanism, but it's important to work on the difficult task of the political systems themselves, and this is what Christine previously mentioned. And I think that is something that everybody is running away from. And unless we just tackle that, then we don't think that the food situation issues in East Africa is going to go away. That might we've tried as humanitarian actors to avert famine for previous and that we encountered in Somalia. Of effective NGOs, the government themselves.
It was working fine a moment ago.
Video, maybe.
It's called a doc where all the other having.
This is audio.
Do you want to ask her to turn off her video? Because that might open up something.
Halima, it's breaking up a little bit here. Can you turn off the video and
Okay.
see whether the audio feed works better? Oh dear, we now seem to have lost all contact. Is it coming back or? No, it isn't. It isn't. Okay. Well, look, Halima was making a strong point there that it's the political imperatives and the challenge that we're running away from them, very much reiterating what Christina said. Look, I'd now like to move on to audience questions, and I've got one or two which are coming in on the feed here. But if you'd like to give your name and affiliation, let's take a few. Is Halima back?
Yes.
Sorry, Halima, can I give you
Hello?
another? Yeah, you're back with us, Halima. Can I give you another couple of minutes,
Yes.
please?
So I'm speaking about the solutions to some of the problems, particularly that the donors and NGOs have actually faced in Somalia. But the best thing that we've seen is effective coordination amongst the NGOs and the UN and other actors as well, where we've seen a concerted effort for the effectiveness of the programmatic interventions during the drought situation. But we want to see more of, bottom-up approach where the community themselves are involved in terms of making certain decisions. And this is making them more resilient into whenever such issues happen. The other one is about scaling up the humanitarian response. We've seen such a scale-up response, but we need to see more of the responses having a quite good momentum in terms of quick agent of donors saying we have to divert the funding opportunities from the programmatic that have been going on to an emergency that just arose. So I think we need to see more of that. And then effective also enabling humanitarian access. And this is Christine, she emphasized the previous speaker on this. I think it's a big issue in Somalia in terms of access. We've seen and we want to see unrestricted access by eliminating also the bureaucratic impediments that we are seeing in some of the regions where it makes a bit for aid agencies facing a lot of challenges on this particularly. But also empowering and equipping the government, because at the end of the day, they are the people who are supposed to be at the front line, making sure that they deal with this effect of famine. And I think that is one thing that we really need to emphasize as aid actors. We make sure that we want to give the government opportunities to speak up and make sure that they have all the capacity they require for them to make sure that they give solutions to their countries as well. Having said that, but also come up with contingency planning and preparedness, which should include at least design of intervention. And this should be the nature, it should be in conjunction with the needs of the community and the nature where the beneficiaries live, as opposed to just giving a very holistic programmatic interventions. And you don't, and for example, somebody who sits in Bay and Bakol in Somalia is not the same, it's not going to be affected the same way that somebody who's sitting in Mogadishu. So I think we should diversify the interventions that we try to give this community. And then probably a bit later, I might, or I don't know if I'm allowed to, just touch on the international food assistance. What changes have I seen? And also the challenges that we're experiencing in Somalia. Can I go ahead?
Yes, if you can do it relatively briefly, Halima, please do.
Okay. So the changes is, we congratulate WFP, to be honest, on the cash assistance intervention. This is positively impacting the community, and the beneficiaries themselves are speaking up, saying that it gave them opportunity to have variety of food in their baskets, and this is very, very important to congratulate those who brought the cash assistance. But also a prompt response as a result of better coordination amongst the humanitarian, which has resulted the death rate, of course, not to be as equivalent as it was in 2011, which is something I think we should uphold ourselves. But also challenges. I think one of the biggest challenge we have is the fact that there's a mismatch of the need against the assistance given, and this is very, very crucial. We might be saying every single time that we need to be focusing on the preventive mechanisms. But if the response is required at that particular moment, because of the crisis happening around the world, I think it gives us a lesser opportunity, Somalis, for us to act quickly and respond to those, to avoid death rates. Those are my contributions for this discussion.
Thank you very much, Halima. We got that beautifully clearly once we'd got over the technical glitch.